Portland's Friday Forum. City Club is where civic-minded people come together to make Portland and Oregon a better place for everyone to live, work, and play. I'm Greg MACPHERSON, president of City Club. Members and guests are gathered today at the Sentinel Hotel, along with all of you listening on OPB Radio or watching on Portland Community Media. The generous support of City Club's corporate and media partners enables us to put on the state's best civic programs week after week. Our media partner is Oregon Business Magazine. Our current Friday Forum sponsors are Echo Northwest, Chevron, Girding Edlin, Morel Inc., Northwest Natural, and Schwabe Williamson & Wyatt. Please join me in showing our appreciation for all of them. After today's program, City Club will take its annual Friday Forum break until after Labor Day weekend. But we will still have some after-hours events in August. City Club's new leaders group will be meeting at 5:30 next Monday, August 3rd, at the Slide Inn on Southeast Ankeny to spotlight Charles McGee, president of the Black Parent Initiative. On August 13, an issue forum at Portland Community College's Southeast 82nd Avenue campus will focus on achieving representational equity for East Portland. On August 20, an issue forum at the Bevan Sports Bar on Northeast Sandy Boulevard will consider affordable housing in East Portland. You can learn more about City Club events, purchase tickets, and become a member on our website, PDXCITYCLUB.org. As always, we will be live tweeting today's program. You can follow along and join the conversation using the hashtag PDXCityClub. Later in today's program, Jefferson Smith will facilitate a Q&A session with those in the live audience. Asking questions at the microphone is a privilege of City Club membership, but anyone in the live audience here at the Sentinel may write a question on one of the index cards found at the center of the tables. Hold the card up and City Club staff will collect them before or during the Q&A session. And if you're not yet a member and decide your question needs to be asked at the microphone to do it justice, go ahead and ask it there, and then sign your membership form at the end of the meeting. And now for today's program. Two important challenges facing the city and the state are how to fund the transportation system and protecting our clean air. The dynamics of these interactive challenges will be considered by a panel bringing various perspectives to the discussion. Among our panelists, Tom Kelly is the CEO of Neil Kelly Remodeling. He is an active civic leader on many fronts. Among Tom's long list of credits are his service as the current chair of the Portland Development Commission and in the past as the founding chair of the Oregon Business Association. ANDREA DURBIN is the executive director of the Oregon Environmental Council. ANDREA is a member of the Global Warming Commission and is recognized as a person of considerable influence on environmental policy. KRISTEN Leonard is the director of public affairs for the Port of Portland. She came to that position in 2014 after a prominent career as a lobbyist in the Oregon Capitol. Today's discussion will be moderated by Jefferson Smith, a veteran political and media figure. Jefferson represented Mid-Multnomah County in the Oregon House, where he served on the Environment and Transportation Committees. Seeing this panel, I am reminded of the words of C.E.S. Wood that are inscribed in the Skidmore Fountain. Good citizens are the riches of a city. With this panel, we are wealthy indeed. Please join me in welcoming them to the Friday Forum.
Good afternoon. Let's try that again. Good afternoon. We live in an era of growing awareness about climate change. Meanwhile, Oregon is falling behind on needed infrastructure and struggles to find funding. Those interests were pitted directly against each other in one of the weirdest episodes of the last legislative session. Today at City Club, we'll talk about the political and policy trade-offs between transportation investments and climate and clean air policy, and what might be a way through. On my way here today, I drove a car without air conditioning. I was stuck in traffic on I-84, and it's about 100 degrees today. So we are going to ask Andrea Durbin if she will cool the planet, KRISTEN if she will improve our transportation infrastructure, and Tom Kelly, who our Governor Kate Brown refers to as Jim, to get me an air conditioner. Andrea Durbin, Executive Director of the Oregon Environmental Council, who apparently has access to a sporty red convertible that I'm not allowed to talk about. The quick facts for review. In March, the Oregon legislature passed the Clean Fuels Bill to reduce carbon emissions. A gang of 8 drafted a compromise, air quotes, to repeal that clean air bill in exchange for passing a highway bill, a transportation package. 19 House members then signed a letter saying they wouldn't vote for a package that included that repeal. Without their votes, a transportation revenue bill was doomed. What the heck happened?
Well, Jefferson, what we saw was that the out-of-state oil industry nearly succeeded in gutting Oregon's clean air law. They were almost successful. Thankfully, they didn't. This program was up for reauthorization in the legislative session because if it hadn't been reauthorized, it would have expired. And the Clean Fuels program is really about cleaning up our air. It's about reducing climate pollution, which is a significant problem, obviously, in the state. It's the equivalent of removing 1.5 million cars off of our road. And the oil industry is vehemently against it because it's an effective program that actually requires them to change their operations. It requires them to change their way of doing business. And so what we saw in the legislative session was that the bill was passed, the reauthorization of the Clean Fuels bill was passed early in the session. The Governor Brown signed it. It was one of the first bills that she signed early in the session. And the oil industry didn't stop. They didn't give up at that point. They filed 2 lawsuits against the state to prevent this program from going forward. And they also worked with Republicans in the caucus to mobilize support for falsely making the connection between passing this transportation package and the Clean Fuels, and repealing the Clean Fuels program. So I think it may be a surprise to your listeners to know that leading into the legislative session, there was broad agreement amongst a number of stakeholders, diverse stakeholders, for passing a transportation package. Oregon Environmental Council, the Port of Portland, the truckers, AAA, a number of the entities, the voices that advocate for investment in transportation package, all were working together to support something, to pass a package in the legislative session that was not conditional on repeal of the Clean Fuels program. But what we found in the session was that the oil industry was successful in connecting the dots and linking passing a transportation package with the condition that Clean Fuels would need to be repealed. And they were nearly successful in proposing a replacement that would have let themselves completely off the hook, would have cost the Oregon taxpayers and ratepayers a lot of money. Thankfully, it didn't happen. And thankfully, the effort to couple them failed, and the governor announced that these issues needed to be decoupled. The package wasn't going forward. 3 hours later, the oil industry announced that they're filing ballot measures, 3 ballot measures in the state to repeal or gut the program. So they're not giving up easily. And I think what's unfortunate is we started the session ready with a broad coalition of stakeholders ready to work together on a transportation package, and we ended the session with that lost opportunity. And it's very hard to build back that support. It's at least going to be another year or longer before we'll find ourselves in a position to be able to invest in the much-needed transportation infrastructure in the state.
Thank you. Can we get a welcome to that guest? Cheer. City Club is known for its enthusiasm, energy, and noise, so we'll bring that today here at the Sentinel. KRISTEN Leonard, you work for the Port of Portland. In a former life, you were a respected lobbyist. In 2009, the Portland Mercury named you the highest surveyed lobbyist in an article entitled "Advocates, Mercenaries, or Minions of Satan." There was no accusation of you as a minion of Satan. what surprised you most about the transportation package debate? And if you can start, and I want to ask Tom this question as well, but if you can start by helping us to understand the political dynamic a little bit and why a non-oil producing state like Oregon, but a state that does grow stuff, seems to have still pretty powerful interests among oil developers and sellers.
Thank you for the question, and I want to back up to the just general politics and then dive into the players a little bit. General politics, I think this came as a surprise for a lot of the partners in the coalition around putting together a transportation package for the 2015 session. The diversity of stakeholders in that group, it was pretty spectacular. As someone who's worked for a long time trying to build coalitions and alliances among all kinds of folks on really complex issues, I was stunned as we walked into rooms leading up to the legislative session at the number of folks that were represented around the table really saying, a transportation package is critical for all of us. It doesn't matter if we're talking about moving freight or increasing the availability and affordability of transit. We all need it, and we're all better for it. And so there was a real unity of vision. Certainly, we would get caught up in particular details, as always happens with policy and politics, but I was really excited, and I think we all were, about the potential. We get deeper into the legislative session, and I don't think that any of us recognized the potential that that could all be pulled apart by one particular bill or one particular interest group, to be perfectly candid with you. And so not recognizing that we were very vulnerable, and the tenacity of the industry and really continuing to push against clean fuels was a problem. You know, as it relates to the power of any particular industry in Salem or any particular advocate, as someone who's spent a lot of time down there advocating on all kinds of issues, I would argue that it's not as much a power of relationships as it is the ability to kill things is a lot easier than the ability to move a particular package or a particular policy. And the bigger and more complex that policy is, the harder it is to move an agenda forward. I mean, we laugh about it in Salem. It's really not funny, but we do. That you can always find a way to kill a bill. It's a whole different ballgame if you're trying to move legislation. Transportation package is so complex that there's a lot of ways that you can just start pulling at it and pulling apart the coalition or pulling apart the policy. And I would say confusion was the industry's friend. You can walk in, you can scare folks, you can confuse folks about the implications of clean fuels. That was their friend, and that's where the power came from.
And we can just apply simple arithmetic to why it's harder to get something done than kill something. To get something done in the legislature, you have to get 5 yeses. Committee, floor, governor. To stop a bill, you only have to get 1 no, any of those 5. Tom Kelly, the chair of the Portland Development Commission, CEO of your company, and one of some number of dozen Kellys in our town. You have to understand, there are like 19 people in the room who think that's really funny. They're not really loud laughers, but they really think that is funny. So we were all surprised by this. I've asked this question of lots of people, including the head of the editorial board of a major newspaper, including legislators, who none of them could answer this. Can you remember a time when the legislature repealed a law that it had just passed in the same session? I'll ask you a question that you can give a longer answer to, but can you remember a time? And I'll ask the same question of our other panelists.
I don't remember a time.
Anybody?
We did the research on it and couldn't find another example of this.
No.
So this is why we say this is one of the weirdest things that happened. Now, we want to get into the counter arguments. Let's start with you, because let's be fair, this panel was all working together. Each of these 3 people were working together to pass this thing, so we want to also make sure to flesh out the counter arguments. Tom Kelly, what did you hear that were the trickiest counterarguments that united the opponents to make sure that there wasn't a transportation package if there weren't a repeal of the Clean Air Bill?
What did I hear that were the trickiest arguments from the other side?
Yeah.
You know, first of all, the oil lobby is very sophisticated. I participate in the Oregon Business Association's Environment Committee, and I heard their presentations. Frankly, I don't think there was anything that they argued that had sound basis.
Well, you didn't agree with them, we know that. But what did they say? What were the key points? Gas tax increase?
You know, I think it's, I mean, when you look at the cost thing, that was, they were predicting 19 cents, I think, increase in the cost of gasoline, even though in California the Clean Fuels program has been in place there for 4 years, and the cost, you guys, is a third of a penny that it's increased gasoline in California. So who do you believe? Somebody's prediction or reality that's happened in California for the last 4 years?
Andrea Durbin, where I bought gas in East Portland, the median income around that area is different than the median income of people who attend a City Club lunch, or frankly different than the median income of this panel. The increase of gas tax, increase of transportation costs, over the course of a year of some number of $100 might not be a big deal if you have a six-figure salary. It might be a big deal if you don't. What do you say to the folks who say, yeah, easy for a new season shopper to increase gas prices, not so easy for an East Portlander?
Well, that's exactly why this program is so important, because it gives consumers more choices. The Clean Fuels program is all about setting, essentially what it does is it sets a target over time that Oregon will clean up its fuel production and reduce its carbon intensity by 10% over 10 years. So it's a gradual process. But what that does, it doesn't pick winners and losers in different technologies. It doesn't require any public subsidies. It requires the oil industry to either clean up their own operations, provide more clean fuels themselves, or invest in clean energy technologies. Technologies that we know are proven. We have companies in Oregon that are already using these technologies, whether it's Fred Meyer for their vehicles, Fran's Bakery, UPS. These are proven technologies, but they're technologies that we don't have enough investment and support for. So what the Clean Fuels program does is it allows Oregon to gradually diversify our fuel options. And it's important for consumers to know that when you diversify, you're diversifying with fuel options that are pretty consistently lower than gas prices.
When you say diversify fuel options, you mean ethanol, not ethanol? What are my diversified fuel options?
It's a range of options, from electricity to ethanol to renewable biodiesel to advanced ethanol. There are a range of options, and they're all evaluated and assessed on their life cycle analysis. So they kind of look from the production to the end pipe, tailpipe emissions. And so it takes a kind of a holistic look at their footprint. Why that's important for consumers is that you provide people with more fuel choices that actually help reduce price volatility. And you provide people with fuel choices that are cheaper than gasoline, so that people living in Eastern Portland will have more choices. Eventually will have they'll have opportunities to spend less on gasoline.
So your basic argument is it make it cheaper. The other thing you said, though, here's the alternative fuels life cycle analysis. So to the person who says, hey, wait, I watched West Wing, ethanol is crap, you say what?
Many people believe that this program is all about corn-based ethanol, and in fact, it's not. What this program does is it helps, because it takes a life cycle view, a kind of a full, from production to end of tailpipe, it means that it values higher fuels that are produced with lower pollution. So corn-based ethanol that's grown in the Midwest, that's used petroleum fertilizer, is not as good and rated as high as biodiesel that's generated from waste grease, or landfill gas that's captured and converted to gasoline, or electricity. All of those have a lower carbon footprint. And so what this does is it helps move us away from the more polluting fuel choices to better options over time that are less polluting.
KRISTEN, Leonard, technology and science are raised. How does the legislature grapple with that? That assumes facts not in evidence, that in fact they do grapple with it. How should policymakers grapple with science? Because some of this was a debate about math and science and technology. Was how much is the gas tax going to be increased? Is ethanol good or is it not so good? What does the science really say? What's the new technology that's going to happen? How does it get grappled with, if at all, or how well, and how should it happen?
Well, it's interesting. One of the questions that I would often ask a freshman legislator as we're getting to wrapping up a given session, I would sit down and say, what was the thing that you were most surprised about in your first kind of term of service, and you thought you knew what you were getting into, and what were you surprised by? And a very talented, savvy individual who'd actually spent a lot of time in the Capitol as a staff person was just finishing up his first session, and he said, I was not prepared for how difficult it would be to get to the real information, to understand who to trust and the information to trust in this process. And this is an individual who'd been around the block there and understood the way it worked, and he was even, just grappling day in and day out with, okay, I'm getting loaded up with a lot of information, and I don't know who to believe, and I don't know who to trust. And I think it is a core problem when you get into these complex issues. It is our role as advocates to try to provide all kinds of information in ways that people can wrap their minds around what does this information mean from trusted sources. But I'm also a firm believer that there's a lot of value in testing these different ideas. Pilot projects, and we kind of all roll our eyes because in theory that takes us longer to get to our ultimate outcome, right? If you have to run a pilot project for a few years, get information, and then start implementing if it looks like it's a positive outcome. But I'm a firm believer in it because let's be honest, if you continue to march along and you don't move the dial on the policy impacts, and it takes several years even to get your bill passed, you could have been running a pilot project in that time. And had those decision makers as stakeholders in what's the feedback and the data that we're going to need to make this decision moving forward. And so I'm a firm believer in what are those other places that have modeled best practices. And it doesn't have to be even in Oregon. It doesn't have to be in the United States. I know that there's a lot of folks that go visit with our friends and allies all over the world about some of their practices and models, and we should be doing a lot more of that because that's how you're going to cut through all the noise.
I hear you say model projects. Not every proposal will have a model project to back it up unless you're saying that they should.
I don't think it's a bad idea.
All right. Some perspective from you, Tom Kelly. In a state where, I want to talk about power. So, in a state where in a city where we just saw, 13 people hanging from a bridge with flags to block a ship from breaking ice to drill oil in the Arctic, when thousands and hundreds of people are celebrating that at the Cathedral Park last night and also tonight, when dozens and dozens of kayakers joined to try to thwart the same ice-breaking ship, in a state where, according to the annual values and beliefs study, nearly 6 in 10 Oregonians say there should be stronger government policies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and just 2 in 10 disagree. Why does that environmental fervor, environmental history, environmental political support not translate into political power?
Money.
Andrea Durbin. Kristen or Andrea, anything you would add? I am not asking you to add to that because I think it is false. I am asking to add so that we give it full shrift.
Well, I do. Tom is absolutely right. I think people might be surprised to know that the oil industry spent $2 million in the state of Oregon last year to try to defeat this program. And that is in a state where, state of Oregon, we don't have any oil refineries, we don't have any oil interests in the state, that they are singling out this state because they know that this program actually impacts their industry. It requires them to change. That's the intent of it. And because it's proven ineffective, that is why they're fighting it so hard. It's not in Oregon alone. They're waging the same campaigns across, up and down the West Coast. As Oregon collaborates with our West Coast states, together we're the 5th largest economy in the world, and together we're trying to establish this clean fuels policy up and down the West Coast that will have an impact on the oil industry, that does drive market change. It does lead us to transition to provide more clean fuel choices to consumers. So that's why this is so important, and we're kind of a battleground state for the oil industry right now, because we're requiring them to actually change the way they operate.
Tom.
So in my perspective, it's really kind of amazing. We talked about some of the partners on the transportation package. Beyond that, the business community, all the major business organizations, AOI, OBA, all supported the transportation package. I mean, it was the thing that came out of the business summit, I think was in January, that was set as the highest priority. Everybody agreed, the governor, everybody agreed. To have that not happen is probably what's got my ire up, to see essentially a bill that was passed by our legislature, signed by the governor, to be then, I hesitate to use this word, but held hostage. And that's what happened. We had a really good policy held hostage because of disagreement over another policy, even though the majority in our legislature, people elected by our citizens, elected these people to go and represent us. So that, to me, was just really frustrating.
And I want to get to some of the nitty-gritty of the political dynamic and how a coalition might be able to be built to get projects done. But let's stay somewhere near 30,000 feet for a moment. Andrea, Republican Theodore Roosevelt was the first environmentalist president. Republican Tom McCall signed our most famous pieces of environmental legislation. Hector McPherson, the father of the man who introduced us today, championed statewide land use planning. But now almost any meaningful climate legislation faces nearly monolithic opposition from Republicans without enjoying monolithic support from Democrats. What work are you doing to build support for climate action among Republicans, or is that a fool's errand and we just face a fundamental reality in the 21st century?
It is absolutely not a fool's errand. If any state can build a coalition with Republicans and show that we have common agreement and support, it's the state of Oregon because of that strong history. I mean, we have a clear history of Republicans leading and recognizing that protecting the environment in this state is a core value of Oregonians. And there are Republicans in the state of Oregon, in our legislature, who understand that climate change, that climate change is an important issue. It's an economic issue. It's a risk to our economy, that we have an opportunity to invest in clean energy and create jobs in this state. But they do not have the space in their party to step out and lead on these issues.
So you say they exist, they have to stay quiet because they're scared.
I think that
somebody just said closet environmentalists out here. I just heard it. The City Club member, he was allowed to say it.
I think that there are definitely Republicans who understand that this is an important issue for the state and for our economy. And what we need to do collectively, I hope listeners who are Republican Party members raise these kinds of issues with their electeds, because that is the kind of change we need. We need to create the space for those Republican leaders to have the ability to step up and lead.
So that might be part, that thing that is either hidden or dreamed about but not as real as we wish it were, that it were 30 years ago. That could be part of a coalition. But let's talk a little bit about the power dynamic, as at least I understand, as we might understand it now. The traditional power that pushes the transportation package is an older coalition of highway builders, the AAA, truckers, construction trades, developers, people who would profit directly and indirectly from a big build. And they tend to push highway projects. They tend to push the kind of thing like the constitutional amendment that makes it so that the Highway Trust Fund can only fund highway projects. A new coalition, sometimes unintentional, has been able to vote to stop things. They include, folks who don't like to spend public money on much of anything, and the people who don't want to subsidize pollution. We might call this the Green Tea Coalition. It was put to me, therefore, there are strong coalitions that exist for one, doing crap projects, or two, doing no projects. How do we build a coalition for doing projects that are climate friendly, not only in word, but also in deed? Anybody can take it who wants to give the best answer they can possibly give.
Well, I think touching on the potential for coalitions here, we've got some big problems that we're facing in this state. And it's not Democrats or Republicans, it's not urban, rural. There's no division that is of demographics that is going to be left untouched. And, you know, looking at some of the data, it was interesting at the port, we were just doing some kind of 10-year discussions. What should we expect in the next 10 years, in the next 30 years, as to those drivers of the kinds of policy and things that we want to take on at the port? And we got to talking about the U.S. Department of Transportation put together some numbers. I mean, 70 million person population increase in the United States in the next, between now and 2045. You think about that, and the biggest population gains are going to be in the South and the West in what are characterized as mega regions, Portland, Seattle, everything in between, Eugene, those are all mega regions that are going to grow exponentially. Simultaneously, we have more large storms, we've got droughts coming. The need is clear, but this is going to drive coalitions out of necessity. We can't fund our firefighting. We can't simultaneously figure out how to be dealing with droughts, and that coalition is going to be part of everyone, and it impacts transportation, it impacts what we do on climate, so I think the potential is actually there because we are all going to have to fix this mess. And it's not just if you are sitting here in an urban area and you're sitting in the parking lot that is probably 205 and I-5 on a Friday afternoon right now, or if you are from a rural community trying to make sure that your condensed hay gets into the one of the ports here and can get across the ocean. I mean, we are all touched by the transportation and the impacts of climate. Those ships can't get out of here if the water rises at the rate that is anticipated with global warming.
There's no contesting the need, and there's no contesting that it impacts everybody. In fact, to me, what's interesting is that I think we all acknowledge that it impacts everybody, and yet there's a disconnect between that reality and political decision-making realities. Let me try this. Which do you think is more likely? Now, in the past, the thing that was more likely is you could assume that some fluffy-hearted, maybe not too muscly environmentalist Democrats would vote in favor of revenue for transportation, even if the environmental elements of that transportation package, shall we say, was a somewhat thin coat of paint. Now, with 19 signing a letter saying, no, we're not down, which do you think is more likely? Being able to get the kind of climate-friendly transportation package that is genuinely climate-friendly, that will get those folks, plus the people in suburban areas who are a little bit worried maybe about drive times, maybe not so fluffy-hearted in their environmental views, and need to get to 36 votes because that's how many it takes in the House and 18 in the Senate because that's how many it takes there. Is it more likely to get that kind of policy, or is it more likely to throw them over the side and get Republicans who say, we don't believe in this climate crap anyway, we just want to make sure we build roads and we build oil and we build businesses? Which is easier to get?
Which is easier?
Yeah,
or which
more likely, or which would you prefer? I would take an answer on any of those
let's
questions.
be honest, status quo is always easier. In the world of public policy, and it doesn't, you know, we've got Mayor Hales sitting here with the city, right? Whether it's at the city level, the state level, the federal level, it's always easier to push for status quo. But I think what's starting to happen, and I guess that's where I was going with this, what's starting to happen is we're all realizing that we're impacted by these larger changes that are going to force action. And a lot of people are starting to step up and really take some leadership on it. And so I think the potential is there. The more likely, just given the way things are, it's always easier to do nothing. But people are starting to pay attention because more and more folks are impacted by what's going on.
Andrea Durbin is twitching.
I know.
Go ahead.
Well, the City Club members may remember last summer, Hank Paulson came to Portland and spoke about a report that he released partnering with Bob Rubin and others, looking at called Risky Business, looking at the economic impacts of climate change. And I think increasingly we're seeing people are connecting the dots. And the more that we value and place a value on climate change impacts and the economic risks and the economic threats to our region, the more likely we're going to see people, that coalition forming. It does, unfortunately, I think it takes the economic risk and threat to build that coalition, to appeal to a broader selection of folks to come together. But I think that we are seeing that it is unfortunately not as fast as we'd like, and it unfortunately takes often a crisis to accelerate action. But my hope is that we can work with leaders in the legislature and in these other interests to accelerate that process and not wait for the crisis to motivate us.
Let's go to our factual interlude. Not that this has been a counterfactual endeavor. Let's go to our factual interlude. So a City Club member had this idea, likes Harper's Index, and said, while everybody is entitled to their own opinion, we should all work from a common set of facts. So we've asked each of our panelists, and thanks for being here, by the way, again. We've asked each of our panelists to bring 3 facts, roughly speaking, unvarnished, to share they think are relevant. Now, to the audience, if you like this section, after it's over, clap and cheer, okay? Because then maybe we'll do it again. If you don't like it, don't clap and cheer, because that'll just set up the next crew for failure, okay? We'll start with you, KRISTEN. 3 facts.
3 facts. Well, I already used one of them a little bit,
Two
but
is we don't want to use up all the facts, so go ahead.
perfect. So I'm going to go with 2, and I was hoping to go regional and then specific to the port. So first, as a regional fact relating to the cost of congestion. Without fully funding a regional transportation plan, every person in the region will spend the equivalent of more than 2 weeks annually sitting in traffic. So think about what that means. That is your vacation.
You just moved beyond the fact.
Sorry.
Next fact.
Next fact. The Port of Portland has reduced carbon emissions 64% below the 1990 baseline, while the activities going out of the port have doubled in that time.
Who do you work for?
The Port of Portland, if I didn't mention already.
Andrea
I had to
Durbin.
get an ad in
This is
there
great.
somewhere.
Andrea Durbin, 3 facts.
One fact is that in spite of what you might read in the Oregonian, this program actually works. We have 2 jurisdictions, British Columbia and California, that have this program in place. It's been working for years. They're finding that it's cleaning up their air, it's reducing their price volatility, and it's helping to serve their consumers.
Fact 1.
Fact 1. Fact 2 is that we talked about corn-based ethanol, so I'm not going to actually go through that again. I think fact 2 is that I mentioned the Oregonian. The Oregonian is actively...
Speaking of facts,
is actively, while they editorialized that they weren't going to talk about climate change, they are actively campaigning against climate change. And you may not know this, but they've editorialized against the Clean Fuels program nearly 20 times in the last couple of years. So part of the reason that there is so much confusion about this program and people don't really understand the impacts of it is that we haven't really been served well. We haven't had a fair, balanced kind of assessment of it because it hasn't been well represented in our media outlets.
all right, those are facts. Tom, you can
So-
give, if you stick it to facts, there's claps here.
So
But he doesn't got any of his facts yet.
The third of a penny was a fact I already mentioned.
Great, 2 more.
Okay. $7 billion, that's what we spend on, correct me if I'm wrong, Andrea, $7 billion is what we spend on gasoline in this state, which all that money flows out of this state. That's, to me, is just phenomenal. And the fact is that clean fuels will result in jobs in Oregon.
That's getting towards advocacy. It's getting just a little nudge of advocacy, but that's good. We'll get a bonus fact. Any other
Okay.
facts?
So
I know
this
this is very
a
hard.
predicted fact.
This is
Jefferson.
very, very hard. Any others?
I'm good.
That's good. Do we like to try to do the fact thing? Do you want to do that? All right. We got a few more minutes. Get ready for your audience questions. There's a note card. When we get to audience questions, remember those admonitions. Anybody's invited to ask a question. If you're a City Club member, you can do it at the microphone. If you're not, you can fill out an index card and raise it high. Earthquakes. New Yorker just announced, apparently after looking at notes from my Geology 101 class from 1993, that over the next 50 years, our region faces a 1/3 chance that will make East Portland beachfront property. No one seemed to take notice of my geology notes from 1993, but social media freaked out over the New Yorker. An emergency plan focusing less on highway expansions and more on seismic retrofits and resilient, perhaps multimodal transportation options might create construction jobs without the negative climate impacts of more and more highways. The Port of Portland is in favor of the transportation package, also in favor of stuff like, let's say, the Columbia River crossing and major highway developments. KRISTEN, how should we think about highways, or maybe should we be thinking about the earthquake thing even more than the highway thing?
Oh, I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think we have to be thinking about all of this. And it's not just highways. This is not surprising you, is it, Jefferson, that this would be my answer. But it's not just highways either. That has certainly not been the focus of the port. We believe that it's multimodal on all aspects. We have to make sure that we're prepared and ready to adapt to all kinds of, whether it's seismic or what changes in weather patterns. We need to make sure that we're incorporating our marine plan, and that's not just the large seagoing ships, it's barges, rail, transit. We expect a great deal of the Portland population to be able to make it to our airport with light rail. We have to be able to adapt to continue to maintain our structure, enhance our structure, and make sure it's sound and safe with all these different aspects that we're facing.
Andrea, KRISTEN makes the good point that we need to advance our structure, we maintain our structure and advance our structure, and advocates for a transportation package that would fund the transportation plans that, roughly speaking, are in place or being developed. Where are those transportation plans falling short where it comes to climate? If we just fund transportation, get transportation money and say, oh good, we can pay for the plan now, where should environmentalists be actually nervous about that idea?
Well, we agree that we need to fix the problems first and repair the degraded roads and bridges that we have across the state. But we also have to really think differently about where we're going in the future. We have to invest in a transportation system that meets the needs of the future. We're finding that young people are forgoing, getting a driver's license and having their own cars. We're seeing new companies like Uber and Lyft replace the kind of need for everyone to have their own vehicle to move themselves around. What we have to do is we have to invest in a system that accommodates and prepares for that, as well as invest in options to move people out of their vehicles. We need to invest in transit. We need to invest in transit operations. We need to expand bus options for people, particularly the most vulnerable, seniors, disabled, youth, so that they have access and more choices. That we need to prioritize and invest in those options to give people a chance to have more options for moving about their business and their daily lives that is not so dependent on single occupancy vehicles.
So it looks like the microphone is there. If you're a City Club member, you can approach the microphone. Now is the time for audience questions. If you have a question, you're not a City Club member, raise your index card very high, someone collect it, and I think they're going to bring it to me, or they're going to throw it away. It's going to be one or the other thing. It'll be more useful, I think, if they bring it to here. As the first audience question, Tom Kelly poked me and said, I have a follow-up thought. So, from the audience, what's your follow-up thought, Tom?
So, I think one of the important things to consider about clean fuels is that our business community will respond and innovation will result. And I couldn't believe it when I opened Oregon Business Magazine last night, and there's this article about this woman in Bend, Rita Hansen, and she's got a business called Onboard Dynamics, and their business model is developing a device that will allow homeowners and businesses to basically put natural gas in their vehicles. So you could actually hook up to your gas line at home and put natural gas in it. In the rating thing, it's if gasoline's at 100% natural gas, which is a great transitional fuel, fits at about 75. So it's a lot cleaner fuel to burn, and it's less costly per mile. So I think we'll see examples like that. The wheat chaff that gets left on the fields can be used, and I know this from, we used wheat board in our cabinets for years. It's not available any longer, but the farmers loved it because the wheat chaff coming off the field was better than leaving it there for the next year, and they got paid for it. Those kinds of things, those benefits can happen in rural Oregon that I think maybe there just isn't an understanding of the positive impacts.
And it makes the political challenge even all the more surprising, given that where some of the resistance, much of the resistance to this policy is coming from rural legislators, when also some of the jobs of an alternative energy future would come from there. First question from the microphone.
Hi, thank you. Mary Pivoto, City Club member and also the co-founder of Neighbors for Clean Air. And I want to thank all the members of the panel for the work that they've been doing in the legislature, because I know that it's been really tough. And the question that I have really comes from being able to be witness to the amazing, what Jefferson already referred to, the spectacle that was down in North Portland. And there's many of us here, I think, that work on the ground and do grassroots organizing and just individual citizens that really care about our environment that are a bit befuddled about why is there such a disconnect between what feels like really moderate policy that is even possible in Salem to have discussions about, and the passion and the commitment that Oregonians feel to our environment. And so I guess my question to you, because I know you guys are working really hard, is what can we do to help you more to connect the grassroots passion to the work in Salem?
We ask on the audience questions. We have a pretty long line, so we can get to them. I'm also told we're supposed to keep answers to 30 seconds if we can. Who wants to take it first? All right, Andrea will do you, and then we'll go to somebody else next.
I would say support campaign finance reform.
Next question.
Spencer Ehrman, City Club member. It's the position of City Club that diesel emissions is one of the leading causes of air toxics in the Portland metropolitan area. Diesel emissions are a drain on the Oregon economy to the tune of between $3 and $4 billion a year through increased costs of health care, time off work, and workers' compensation costs. My question is this, of Andrea, what will it take to get the environmental community fully behind figuring out how to get diesel retrofits out into all equipment? And to Tom, what will it take to get the business community to appreciate that the cost of retrofitting is very small compared to the ultimate savings of costs of healthcare, both in terms of costs of employee benefits, group health insurance, and particularly workers' compensation to the construction and transportation industries?
Reducing diesel, there was a bill in this last session as well, working with Neighbors for Clean Air to reduce diesel emissions. It didn't pass this session. It is a priority for the environmental group and groups like mine, Oregon Environmental Council, and we will absolutely work on that. We hope it passes in the next session. I will say that clean fuels is a twofer. It is a program about reducing climate pollution. It's also a program that has real clean air benefits because exhaust from trucks and cars emits smog and cancer-causing chemicals like arsenic and benzene in our air. And so moving towards clean fuels, it also gives us those real benefits for, in the Portland metro area, particularly where it's an issue in Southern Oregon, where it's an issue, but really an issue for low-income populations, vulnerable populations who are even more exposed to air pollutants. So that's one of the reasons that protecting clean fuels is so important, is to reduce those, the air quality, air pollution problems in the state.
So one of the things that happened for me, I used to have this perspective years back that the business community in Oregon was kind of regressive. And then I was involved in starting the Oregon Business Association, and what I discovered was we have a tremendous business community that really cares about the environment, really cares about things like diesel. It is the narrow interest when we come up against an issue like this that put in a lot of money, and that's why we're not able to overcome things like that. My understanding is that because of the diesel regulations in California, that trucks that don't qualify now in California are resold on the market up here, so we can use trucks not legal in California to pollute our environment. It's pretty amazing, actually.
Next question.
ANDREA, City Club member. This is exciting, it's inspiring, and it's also a little troubling in many respects because there's a lot of work to be done. And one of those things, task, I think, is in front of us and the business community in particular, is changing behavior. We long since ceased to be with citizens and with consumers. How do we convert that behavior into a way of addressing the environmental issues that are before us today?
Were you able to capture that question? KRISTEN Leonard.
I would say on a couple fronts. We all need to be leading by example, whether we are in a business or if we're just individuals in our neighborhood. We need to lead by example, and we need to step beyond our interests and start advocating in whatever way that looks like. And if that's showing up at your neighborhood association and saying something's important, or getting involved and going to Salem and advocating with these various organizations. We all have a responsibility on that front.
Great. We're going to try something different. We're going to try to do questions 2 at a time. You're going to ask your question, the next person's going to ask your question, and then they're going to answer it. And we're going to get through every single one of the people who's in line, because that's what we're going to do by the end. So you're first, and then we'll do the second, and then you guys can answer, because sometimes they're related. Go ahead.
Well, mine's an easy question. Ted Kay, City Club member. KRISTEN Leonard, you talked about how legislators in Salem are desperate for information they can trust. Question, are City Club research studies trusted by legislators?
Can you hear me? Oh, there we go. That's a great question. Oh,
We're going to take questions
wait.
one at a time, and KRISTEN's going to give this
Sorry.
answer. It was a brief experiment. It's fine. Keep going. We do pilot projects here, and then we make policy after we do the pilot projects.
I'm not
KRISTEN,
very
go
good
ahead.
at following directions.
You're
if that's
amazing.
not obvious.
Go ahead.
Yes, City Club is a respected source of information, but it is one piece of a lot more information that needs to come from communities and neighborhoods throughout Oregon. This is one piece of it, but it's a very unique view of the world.
Next question.
My name is Sharon Joy, City Club member. I had 2 questions, but that's okay.
That's like the opposite. That's almost exactly the opposite of what I said. So pick your favorite, because we want to get to the rest.
Okay. Would you be in favor of a constitutional amendment of extended responsibility for businesses?
Constitutional amendment for responsibility of businesses. I want to take the next question, and then we're going to answer that one and the next one at the same time while they process. Your question was deep and helpful. Next question.
I'm a City Club member named Bill Harris. Someone today mentioned the an estimated total amount of money spent in political effort by the energy industry toward the Oregon legislature. Would you mention again that total amount and the proportion that was lobbying at the legislature as opposed to campaign contributions?
Yes, the total amount that the oil industry has spent in Oregon in 2014 on combined political contributions and lobbying was $2 million. It's $7 million since this Clean Fuels program was passed. So it's, I don't have the breakdown of division between political contributions and lobbying expenses, but that's the total.
And we had the question about changes to the Constitution. You could take, you could take that. It gives you freedom to go in a couple different places. But should there be constitutional changes, either with respect to corporate responsibility, as the question stated, or let's say even with respect to the Highway Trust Fund, anything the Constitution ought to be doing to address the questions from today?
Wow, I would say a constitutional amendment is often a difficult way to achieve quality public policy that you really have input from the various stakeholders. By virtue of the fact that, any of us could go to our kitchen table and sit and craft what we think would be great statewide public policy, and none of us in this room have enough information as to the implications to all the different stakeholders. So I have always preferred, if we can achieve something through more of a coalition effort and with allies legislatively at whatever level of government, to me that's the preferred way, because you have a lot more buy-in and you know the implications of what you're setting in motion.
We have a multiple choice question. Rural projects. It's my understanding that we have successful renewable energy projects throughout the state. Solar in Lake County, small hydro in Astoria and Hood River, wind in Gillum and Sherman, biodigesters in Tillamook and Junction City. Yet the political representatives from much of rural Oregon consistently vote against legislation which would benefit their constituents by driving more renewables. Why the disconnect? Here are your possible answers. A, what's the matter with Kansas? B, powerful institutions, utilities, farm bureaus don't want change. C, fossil fuel-based industries, the FIB and Chamber are invested in the status quo and have more influence with rural legislators than a few people who want jobs or some new potential industry. D, don't worry, it only goes to F. Legislators who do care about other things more, equity, poverty, education, etc. E, opponents are skilled at playing them off against one another. F, some combination. We don't have time for comments. Pick a letter.
F. Yeah. Some combination.
Okay, the answer was F. You don't have to applaud if you want that to happen again. It might anyway. What we're going to do, because we're just running out of time, is we're going to take, how many questions? Raise your hand if you're actually in line to ask a question. Oh, we're going to be able to do it. We can do it one at a time. You're great. Go ahead.
Okay. City Club has done a number of studies on transportation, not one on global warming, although. Are there any of those studies that come to mind that have been influential in your work and discussions and thinking?
The question, I believe, was any City Club studies that have been influential in the work. The people who toil away in the policy committee of the City Club want one of you to say, yes, it's deeply relevant that you spend all that time and create all that helpful information, and we care more about that than a lobbyist single-page letter.
The study that I'm most familiar with is the air quality study, which has been very, very helpful in laying out the assessment of the problem and some of the recommended solutions.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Shannon Carney. I'm a City Club member. So I am just curious. I know we've talked a lot about how the efforts that you've put forth this year down in the legislature will clean up the fuels in order to combat climate change. And I guess I'm just curious about the environmental community's take on development. I know we have the city's comprehensive plan coming up, and we're going to be deliberating that. And as we all know, our transportation choices are highly related to where we live. So I'm just curious if you have any hopes for the city's comprehensive plan in terms of density or any advocacy efforts around that deliberation.
Just quickly, the compact development is a core piece of kind of planning for the future and smart transportation planning, climate-friendly transportation planning that we need more of in the state.
Clean air and water is related to sufficient riparian borders next to streams. The Board of Forestry has delayed until September consideration of expanding the riparian protection to 20 feet. Will you respond as a coalition? Is there plans, and anybody on this panel, to work on riparian borders? Asks this note card.
We do work on riparian issues in some of the work that Oregon Environmental Council does on our water program, yes.
Let's have this be our last question. We're out of time. And take just a little bit to, take as little as it takes to answer. Imagine we're here in a year, and we're going to predict where we're at a year from now. Where do you think we're going to be?
I think we're going through a transformational time, and we may be at a tipping point where, as a society, we're going to understand better the threats of climate change, and that politically we will see a sea change. And say that because the sea's going to change. I just made that up, thanks.
It's good. It's good material. I'm writing it down.
But no, I think we're at a time where, worldwide, nationally, even potentially, but especially in a state like ours that I think historically has been an enlightened state, that we are going to see we need to make these kinds of support things like clean fuels, or our alternatives really get, pretty negative.
20 seconds, Kristen Leonard.
Say we are going to continue to have a tension between more folks wanting and expecting change as it relates to climate, and the dialogue about how do we pay for it and how do we get folks invested in our community with the money. So that will continue.
Andrew Durbin.
Oregon is a battleground state on climate change nationally, and we're going to see opportunities for Oregon to really step up, lead, transition our economy to be a clean energy economy, create the kind of jobs and protect the quality of life that we all love and value so much.
Can we get a big round of applause for our members and for our panelists? Thanks, everybody. Thanks for coming. Thanks for being a member of City Club. Thanks for having this conversation, which is an important one.
We've run out of broadcast time, and we'll stop for the day. This is Greg McPherson, President of City Club, wishing you an enjoyable late summer break. Thank you, everyone.